The scorching Texas sun beat down relentlessly on the gravel road as Marcus Thompson drove his dusty pickup the last few miles to his new property. At 42, he had sold everything he owned in Austin, house, new car, furniture, to buy that abandoned ranch in Brewster County. The real estate agent had been clear about the property's deteriorated state, but the rock-bottom price and the promise of a fresh start away from the suffocating urban life were enough to convince him. As he observed the parched fields and rusted barbed wire fences stretching as far as the eye could see, Marcus felt the weight of a lifetime's savings transformed into those arid acres. The hot wind carried the scent of sage and dust, whispering uncertain promises about his future in that god-forsaken place. The main house, a faded wooden structure with a covered porch, showed evident signs of years of neglect. Marcus walked through the empty rooms, observing the dusty windows that filtered the golden light of the Texan evening. Every floorboard creaked under his feet, echoing in the peeling walls that had once been white. In the backyard, a rusted windmill spun lazily, producing a metallic, melancholy sound that blended with the distant lowing of lost cattle. Marcus had planned to start small, perhaps with a few head of cattle and a vegetable garden, but the reality of the property was more challenging than he had imagined. Still, there was something comforting in that solitude, in the vastness of the cloudless blue sky, and the feeling of truly being alone with his thoughts for the first time in years. It was exactly the kind of fresh start he needed. As night fell like a dark cloak over the ranch, Marcus decided to explore the barn he had spotted earlier. The imposing structure rose against the star-filled sky, its dark wooden walls absorbing the faint light of the crescent moon. He pushed open the double doors, which groaned long and hauntingly, revealing the interior plunged in dense shadows. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating piles of old hay, rusted tools hanging on the walls, and cobwebs swaying gently in the night breeze. The air inside the barn was heavy, laden with the sweet, sickening smell of rotting wood, mixed with something more unsettling that he couldn't identify. Marcus took a few cautious steps, his shoes producing muffled echoes on the dirt floor. It was then that the flashlight beam found something that made his blood run cold. Hanging from the central rafters of the barn, a human figure swayed lightly in the still air. Marcus let out a choked cry, almost dropping the flashlight as he instinctively recoiled. Forcing himself to breathe and hold the light steady, he observed with growing horror that it was a young woman, but her proportions were disconcertingly large. She must have been over 7 feet tall. Her simple clothes, a faded floral dress and worn leather shoes, suggested a rural origin. Her long blonde hair hung in disheveled strands, partially covering a face that even in death retained delicate and youthful features. A thick rope was tied around her neck, connected to the ceiling rafters with a knot that seemed to have been made with knowledge and practice. Marcus felt his stomach churn as the reality of the situation crystallized in his stunned mind. He had bought a property with a corpse. Marcus's trembling hands dialed the emergency number as he struggled to maintain composure. Within an hour, the ranch was swarming with police cruisers, an ambulance, and a county medical examiner's vehicle. Red and blue lights flashed against the barn walls, creating a surreal spectacle in the middle of the Texas night. Sheriff Jake Morrison, a burly man with a grizzled mustache and a suspicious gaze, asked direct questions while technicians photographed the scene. Marcus explained that he had just bought the property and discovered the body, but he could feel the skepticism in the sheriff's eyes. The closest neighbors, drawn by the commotion, gathered outside the crime scene tape, whispering among themselves and casting speculative glances in Marcus's direction. The woman was carefully removed and taken for autopsy, but the questions hung in the air, like the dust stirred up by the official vehicles leaving in the early morning. In the following days, the news spread through the small neighboring towns like wildfire through dry grass. Marcus discovered that the property had been vacant for almost 5 years since the death of the previous owner, a recluse named Eugene Hartwell. No one in the region could identify the young woman, and her unusual height only fueled more speculation and conspiracy theories. Marcus tried to maintain his routine, fixing fences and cleaning the house, but he felt the weight of suspicious glances every time he went to town for supplies. Conversations ceased when he entered the hardware store, and people greeted him with stiff nods instead of the warm handshakes typical of rural Texas. The ranch, which was supposed to represent a new beginning, was quickly transforming into a prison of suspicion and social isolation. Marcus realized he had bought much more than land and buildings. He had inherited a mystery that threatened to consume any hope of peace left in his life. Sheriff Morrison's investigation revealed few concrete details about the victim's identity. The autopsy confirmed she was a woman between 20 and 25 years old, standing 7 feet tall, a rare medical condition known as gigantism. There were no records of missing persons matching the description in the area, and her fingerprints were not in any database. The estimated time of death ranged from 6 months to 2 years, further complicating the investigation. Marcus anxiously followed every development, hoping that the resolution of the case would bring peace back into his life. However, with each passing day without answers, the community's suspicion of him grew like a dust storm on the horizon. Neighbors began to avoid him completely, and even the mailman left correspondence in the box without a wave. The isolation weighed on his shoulders like the oppressive heat of the Texas midday. During a visit to the public library in Alpine, the nearest town, Marcus decided to research the property's history. The librarian, an elderly woman with thick glasses named Helen, was initially reluctant to help him, but her natural curiosity about local history won out. She led him to local newspaper archives and property records dating back to the early 20th century. Marcus discovered that his ranch had passed through several hands over the decades, often sold quickly for below-market prices. There were sparse mentions of labor disputes, problems with migrant workers, and rumors of questionable dealings involving former owners. An article from 1987 mentioned a federal investigation into human trafficking in the region, but details were vague, and the case had apparently been filed without conclusions. Helen whispered that there had always been strange stories about that land, but people preferred not to talk openly about it. Marcus found a crucial clue in the records of Eugene Hartwell, the previous owner. Hartwell had bought the ranch in 1995 and lived there as a hermit, rarely going to town and maintaining minimal contact with neighbors. In the last years of his life, he had occasionally been seen buying supplies in larger quantities than would be necessary for a single person. A former hardware store employee remembered Hartwell buying thick ropes, chains, and padlocks, claiming he needed them for cattle containment, although there were never signs of animals on his property. The employee also recalled that Hartwell always paid in cash and seemed nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder. This information began to form a disturbing picture in Marcus's mind. He realized that perhaps Hartwell was not just an eccentric recluse, but someone involved in much darker activities. The young woman in the barn could have been a victim of something far worse than he initially imagined. The truth began to unravel when Marcus found a hidden compartment in the basement of the main house. Behind a seemingly solid wooden wall, he discovered a small space that had been used as a makeshift cell. Chains were still attached to the walls, and on the floor were remnants of dirty blankets and dented metal plates. A diary left by Hartwell, written in a shaky hand, revealed horrifying details about a human trafficking scheme operating in the region. The giant young woman, whose real name was Sarah McKenna, had been held there against her will along with other victims over the years. Hartwell had meticulously documented the business he conducted, selling vulnerable people for forced labor on remote farms in South Texas. Sarah, due to her unique physical condition, had been considered special merchandise and kept longer than the other victims. The diary ended abruptly, suggesting that Hartwell had died before he could deliver Sarah to the final buyer. Marcus faced an agonizing moral dilemma upon discovering this information. He knew that turning the diary over to the authorities would place him at the center of a complex federal investigation, potentially ruining any chance of peace in his new life. On the other hand, the victims' families deserved to know the truth, and those responsible for the criminal scheme might still be active in the region. During sleepless nights, he walked through the dry fields under the starry Texas sky, weighing his options. The night wind carried the distant sound of coyotes howling, reminding him of the wild and unforgiving nature of that place. Finally, his conscience spoke louder than fear. Marcus contacted the FBI, handing over the diary and sharing all the information he had discovered. The ranch was once again swarmed by authorities, this time federal agents who excavated the property in search of more evidence. Marcus watched from a distance, knowing he had made the right decision, even if it meant sacrificing his privacy and tranquility. Months later, when the federal investigation concluded and the last official vehicles left his property, Marcus remained on the ranch. The land had revealed its darkest secrets, but it had also purified itself through the truth. Sarah McKenna and other victims finally received the dignified burial they deserved, and their families found the closure they had sought for years. Several members of the criminal network were arrested, including influential local ranchers Marcus had never suspected were involved. Gradually, the local community began to see him not as a suspect, but as someone who had the courage to expose a terrible injustice. The price was high. His ranch would never be just a peaceful refuge, but rather a living memorial of suffering and redemption. Still, as he watched the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and red, Marcus felt a peculiar peace. He had lost his savings buying that cursed land, but he had found something more valuable: the certainty of having done the right thing, even when it cost him everything he possessed. Spring arrived at the ranch with an unexpected gentleness, bringing rains Marcus hadn't seen since moving to Texas. The parched land absorbed the water like a sponge, and small green shoots began to emerge among the weeds that dominated the fields. Marcus established a simple routine. He woke before dawn, tended to the few animals he had managed to buy with his remaining money, and spent afternoons repairing fences and buildings. The barn, now empty and clean, had been transformed into a functional storage space. He avoided looking at the rafters where Sarah had been found, but not out of fear or disturbance. It was more a gesture of silent respect. The nearest neighbors, the Rodriguez family who lived 5 miles away, began to greet him on the rare occasions they met on the road. It was small progress, but significant in a community that values trust above all else. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the medical examiner who had conducted Sarah's autopsy, paid an unexpected visit to the ranch one April afternoon. She explained that she had developed a personal interest in the case, not just a professional one. Elena revealed that she also suffered from a condition that made her different, a mild form of gigantism that gave her an imposing stature of 6 feet, 1 inch. She uniquely understood the difficulties Sarah had likely faced during her life. "People like us draw attention wherever we go," Elena said, observing the verdant fields. Sarah never had the chance to live a normal life, but at least now she can rest in peace. Marcus offered coffee, and they talked for hours about the investigation, about second chances, and about how places laden with tragedy can still blossom again. Eleanor became a regular visitor, bringing medical perspectives and a genuine friendship that Marcus hadn't expected to find. The FBI officially concluded its investigation in early summer, confirming that the human trafficking network had been completely dismantled. Special Agent Rivera, who led the operation, informed Marcus that 17 people were arrested, including 3 sheriffs from neighboring counties who facilitated the scheme. More importantly, 42 victims were identified over 15 years of operation, allowing families to finally learn the fate of their missing loved ones. Sarah McKenna had been abducted from a traveling circus in Oklahoma 3 years prior, where she worked as an attraction due to her exceptional height. Her family, who had been desperately searching for her, was finally able to hold a proper funeral. Marcus was invited to the ceremony, held in a small rural church where Sarah had grown up. It was a deeply moving experience that gave him emotional closure he didn't know he needed. Seeing the gratitude in Sarah's parents' eyes validated all the difficulties he had faced. As the months passed, Marcus developed a different relationship with his property. He established a small memorial where Sarah was found, a simple wooden cross with a plaque that read, "In memory of Sarah McKenna and all lost souls." Occasional visitors, mainly victims' families, came to pay their respects, and Marcus always received them with genuine Texas hospitality. He began to raise cattle more seriously, buying a few head of Black Angus that adapted well to the regenerated pasture. Nights in the barn were no longer haunted by disturbing memories, but rather filled with the comforting sounds of healthy animals and the sweet aroma of fresh hay. Marcus discovered that there was a deep satisfaction in working the land with his own hands, in seeing growth and life emerging from a place that had once known so much death. His ranch was becoming a symbol of renewal, not only for him, but for the entire community that had been affected by the tragedy. A year after the discovery that changed his life, Marcus received an unexpected proposal. A documentary producer from Austin wanted to make a film about the case, offering a substantial sum for the rights to his story. Marcus politely declined, explaining that some stories are too personal to be turned into entertainment. Instead, he collaborated with Elena Vasquez to create a support center for families of human trafficking victims, using the ranch as its headquarters. The project attracted donations and volunteers from across the state, transforming the property into a place of healing and hope. Marcus discovered that his true calling was not just to be a rancher, but to be a guardian of memory and a facilitator of healing. People who came to the center often commented on the peace they felt there, how the land seemed to embrace them with compassion. It was exactly the kind of legacy Marcus wanted to build, on the foundation of his courageous decision to seek the truth. The December sunset painted the Texas sky with shades of orange and purple as Marcus walked through the fields he now knew like the back of his hand. 2 years had passed since he spent all his savings on that ranch, and although the financial investment had been a complete disaster, he had gained something immeasurable: purpose and inner peace. The ranch prospered modestly, the support center helped dozens of families annually, and Marcus had found a community of people who shared his values of justice and compassion. Elena had become more than a friend. She was a partner in every sense, someone who understood both his journey and his mission. As he watched the cattle grazing peacefully under the first stars of the night, Marcus reflected on how fate sometimes leads us down the most improbable paths to show us who we truly are. He had come to Texas seeking solitude and simplicity, but found responsibility and meaning. The giant girl in the barn had forever changed the destiny of that forgotten land, transforming it into a beacon of hope in the heart of the Texas desert. 3 years after the discovery, Marcus had transformed his ranch into something that transcended his most optimistic expectations. The support center for families of human trafficking victims grew organically, with guest cabins built by volunteers to accommodate visitors who came from distant states. The old main house became an administrative center, while a new residence was built in the hills, offering Marcus and Elena a panoramic view of the now verdant fields. The cattle herd grew to 50 head, providing a modest but steady source of income that complemented the donations received by the center. During the mornings, Marcus still followed his rancher routine, checking on the animals and maintaining the pastures, but afternoons were dedicated to receiving families, coordinating with social workers, and working with Elena on developing psychological support programs. The transformation of the property mirrored his own evolution, from a man fleeing his urban life to someone deeply engaged in serving others who faced the worst imaginable circumstances. The relationship between Marcus and Elena flourished naturally, built on solid foundations of mutual respect and shared purpose. Elena had left her job at the medical examiner's office to dedicate herself full-time to the center, bringing her medical expertise and unique understanding of the needs of people who had suffered severe trauma. They married in a simple ceremony at the same location as Sarah's memorial, with the blessing of the families who had found solace at the ranch. The local reverend, initially skeptical about the duo who had stirred up stagnant waters, became one of the greatest advocates for their work. Their honeymoon was a trip to Oklahoma to visit the McKenna family, who had become like adoptive parents to the couple. During the visit, they established a scholarship in Sarah's name for young people suffering from rare medical conditions, ensuring that her memory continued to generate positive impacts. The marriage represented not only the union of two people, but the consolidation of a shared life mission. National recognition arrived unexpectedly when an investigative journalist from CNN discovered the story through contacts at the FBI. This time, Marcus and Elena decided to accept the media coverage, recognizing that visibility could help other victims and their families. The special report, broadcast during prime time, brought hundreds of calls from across the country. Families looking for missing loved ones, human trafficking survivors seeking support, and organizations wanting to establish partnerships. The center needed to expand rapidly, hiring licensed social workers and establishing a triage system to handle the volume of requests for help. Marcus discovered that his personal story of financial loss and accidental discovery had touched something deep in the American consciousness. People sent donations accompanied by heartfelt letters, sharing their own stories of loss and renewal. The ranch became a national symbol of how ordinary individuals can make a difference when confronted with systemic injustices. During a stormy night in March, 5 years after the original discovery, Marcus was awakened by urgent knocks on the door. A middle-aged Hispanic man, drenched by the rain and trembling with cold and fear, begged for help. He explained, in broken Spanish mixed with English, that he had escaped from a farm where he was held in slavery, only 60 miles away. Marcus and Elena immediately contacted the authorities, but also welcomed the man, offering him dry clothes, warm food, and a safe place to rest. The subsequent investigation led to the rescue of 16 migrant workers who were living in inhumane conditions, confirming that the criminal networks Hartwell was part of had not been completely eradicated. The incident reinforced the importance of the work they were doing and demonstrated that their ranch had become a beacon of hope, recognized even by those in the most desperate situations. Marcus realized that his property had acquired a reputation among vulnerable communities as a place of genuine refuge. Elena announced her pregnancy on a golden September morning as they walked among the rows of sunflowers they had planted in the south field. The news brought a completely new joy to their lives, already full of purpose. Marcus imagined their child growing up on that land that had witnessed so much suffering, but which now symbolized renewal and hope. They began to plan how to adapt the center to accommodate a growing family, ensuring that the child grew up understanding the importance of humanitarian work without being overwhelmed by it. Elena expressed the desire for their child to understand the history of the ranch, including Sarah's tragedy, but within a context of how ordinary people can choose to make a difference. During the months of pregnancy, visitors frequently commented on the positive energy they felt on the property, as if the land itself was celebrating the new life to come. Marcus often reflected on how the discovery that had initially seemed like a curse had become the foundation for the most meaningful period of his life. 6 years after spending all his savings buying that Texas ranch, Marcus watched the sunset from the top of the hill where his house now stood. Below him stretched a transformed property. The support center operated in modern and welcoming buildings, the green fields housed a healthy herd, and memorial gardens honored dozens of victims whose stories had been discovered and told. His 6-month-old daughter, Sarah Elena Thompson Vasquez, slept in his arms, named in honor of the young woman whose death had catalyzed all that transformation. The financial investment that seemed to have ruined his life proved to be the best decision he had ever made. The ranch generated enough income to support his family and the center. Donations allowed continuous expansion of the services offered, and most importantly, hundreds of families had found comfort and support in moments of absolute despair. Marcus understood that some discoveries, however disturbing they may initially be, are disguised gifts that guide us to our true destiny. The giant girl hanged in the barn had forever changed that forgotten land, transforming it into a living testament to how courage and compassion can flourish in the most unlikely places.